And then there's
And there
nobody
are
on.
yeah, there's no attendees, so it's everybody that we have here.
I see two, and I believe John Tilley is joining us by phone. John?
And you do have two, two attendees?
Yeah, we do now. They just came in.
John, is that you, ending in 754?
Yes.
Okay.
And Kevin just joined. We can move him into the panel. There we go. And the other attendee is our board chair. So, all right, let's do a quick roll call.
All right. John Tilley,
Present.
Scott Dick, Bill Peak,
Here.
Kevin Urquhart, Kevin Urquhart,
I think he's still muted.
Yep.
should be a panelist. All right, Mike Rachel,
Here.
Marley Mountain,
Here.
Melody Chrislock,
Here.
Jason Campbell,
Here.
Susan Schiavone,
Here.
and then going back to Kevin Urquhart.
I think I unmuted myself.
Yeah, you're good.
Good.
And the only one that's absent is Scott Dick.
Great. Well, let's get started. I think the bulk of this meeting will be run more through Suresh than myself because we've just gone through an adopted budget cycle and want to tell you a little bit about what we're projecting. Also part and parcel to that, of course, is that we have adopted certain project expenditures for the year, which has obviously a significant impact on uses of the water supply charge and financial flexibility. So with that, let's first go out. Joelle, I know that you can see the public. Let's call for comments from the public on items not on the agenda.
Right, so if you would like to make public comment on items not on the agenda, please raise your hand. And Dave, I don't see anybody with their hands raised, so I'll just turn this back forward.
Great, we've got one action item, which is consider adoption of committee meeting minutes of March 24th, 2021. I'd take a motion and a second to adopt or any changes to the minutes as you see them.
Move to adopt. Second.
So who made the motion? Was that Susan?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the second was Marley?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 I'll abstain.
Yeah, forget, was that supposed to be roll call? That was almost roll call anyway by
Right.
By default.
default.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
let's just do a roll call. Susan Schiavone,
Yes.
Jason Campbell,
Yes.
Melody Chrislock, Marley Mountain,
Yes. Melody, for some reason you're muted again.
Mike Rachel,
Yes.
Kevin Urquhart,
Yes.
Bill Peak,
Aye.
and Scott Dick is absent. John Tilley. Going back to Melody Chrislock
Yes.
and John Tilley. All right.
well,
I thought I heard an abstain in there
Right.
on the first round. Maybe that was John.
Chilly.
Absolutely present.
Okay, we'll just mark it down as present. Okay, so as mentioned, we recently adopted a budget which has impacts on the revenue projections. So we'll start with discussion item 2. Suresh, you want to walk us through this?
Yeah, Joel, you want to bring out the charts on screen for everyone? There should be 2 charts. So while Joel's pulling up the charts for us, the first one is the water supply charge receipt report. And basically we do the collection report through the period that we are reporting. And here you'll see the highlighted column. We are reporting through April 30th, 2021. And we did budget $3.3 million for last fiscal year. We ended up collecting a little over $3.3 million. So we are pretty much 100% collected on the water supply charge for the fiscal year. We have made some changes to the format itself based on the recommendation from this committee at our last meeting. The recommendation was to move the columns that we are reporting on to the left and then the older columns to the right. So that's what we've done here. The shift is the older columns going to be on the right, and the newer columns going to be on the left. So next chart, please, Joel. So this is the actual what we call the water supply charge availability analysis. And again, we report through the period April 30th. Here we report all of the revenues that we collect for the district, only related to water supply charge, though. We do accrue everything into our water supply charge fund. And so that's our fund 35, what we call internally. And as you can see, the water supply charge is the very first line item that I presented on the previous slide. And then we have the capacity fee. We started billing for the PWM water sales as well, and that's reported through Fund 35 as well. So that's captured on here. We do have the project reimbursements. We have the property tax allocation as well. And now we've got the 2 collections for the December collection and the April collection. So they both reported in here. We will have a smaller final piece collection in June for both water supply charge and property tax. So that's going to bump those revenues up even a little more. We also have our user fee, the portion that's allocated to the water supply charge. And just a reminder that the portion that's allocated to the water supply charge from the user fee is only 1.2%.
Yeah, not water supply charge, but water supply
fund, water supply
fund.
fund. Yes, I keep mixing those two. And then we have the interest collection, and then we also have the reclamation project, where in about a year ago, we helped pay for a tank restoration, and that was $1 million that we helped push forward on the project. And the promise was to reimburse us over 2 fiscal year periods. So the first fiscal year, 2021, $500,000 that came in. So that's that reclamation project number. So all in all, total revenues budgeted was a little over $13 million. We've collected so far 11.7. Keep in mind, we still have 2 more months of collection. So that should be fairly right in line with what the revenues anticipated budget was. Going towards the expenditure part, you can see we break out the direct and the indirect. When we did form the water supply committee, there was when we did adopt the water supply charge, there was a push for it to make sure that we don't exceed 15% on the indirect administrative part of the fee. And so that's why we break out between the direct personal and the indirect. So you'll see the first 2 lines, direct personal, direct supplies and services, pretty much in line with what the budget was. Legal fees, somewhat lower than what the expected 220,000 was. And then project expenses, I'll point to that in just a few seconds here, because that's kind of like towards the bottom part of the screen. But in summary, I'm showing $8 million on the project expenses, and then project expenses reimbursement, $392,000. We have fixed asset purchases, contingencies, and then debt service, election, and then the indirect labor and indirect supplies and services. So if you go towards the bottom part of the screen, you'll see the project expenses kind of like broken out in detail, and you'll see the PWM project, the expansion, PWM project operating reserve water, and then the PWM water purchase. This is the water that we buy and then we turn around and sell it to CalM. So that's that line that's captured there. We have the ASR phase 1 project cost. We have the reimbursement projects, and then some of the other small ticket line items, as you can see on there. So I don't know if Dave wants to touch on any of those specific projects, but all in all, we had expenses of $10.1 million compared against a budget of 19.6. When we did adopt the budget, we had said there was some carryover project cost and also the use of fund balance. And so that's that $6.6 million what was going to be used from the fund reserve. And so that's what we show on the budget side. But right now through April, because we have not done all of the projects, some of those projects are kind of like moving into next fiscal year. So we have not had a need to use the reserve fund. So that's why you'll see that $10 million against $11 million revenue, it just shows a little surplus of 1.6, but really is not a surplus, because if you look at the budget column, you will see that we were going to be using about $6.6 million from our fund balance. So if all of the projects were to materialize, that's what the picture would have shown, is that we are using 6.6 from our fund balance.
Yeah, and several of those have been deferred into next fiscal year, so they'll come back to haunt us. But
yeah, the big one that I'd like to point out on the PWM project is we had estimated a little over $3 million or close to $4 million on the deep injection well number 4, and that's just taken off right now. We've got another bill that came in just in June for I believe $700,000, but the bulk of it, the remainder of it, is going to be into fiscal year 21-22. So that's kind of like a carry forward item.
And I guess our next meeting will see the whole fiscal year, the additional 2 months, which will make this a little more complete. It's always hard to feel like you're done with the year to date, but you don't have all the information yet, and we haven't closed our books. But generally speaking, apart from project deferrals, I think we budgeted pretty accurately, and the expenditures line up.
So that's all I have on that item. If there's any questions.
Just clarification.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just curious, you said the project would be reimbursed over a certain period, but I didn't quite catch how long that was. And that was on project reimbursement.
Yeah.
In the revenue column, where we look to be about $800,000.
Yeah, so the project reimbursements are pretty much run through the water supply fund is the ASR reimbursements. And so we do a 6-month billing for the ASR reimbursement. So every 6 months we turn around whatever the operating cost had been for the ASR, which is the Aquifer Storage Recovery Project, we turn around and bill CalM so that CalM reimburses us. So that's the reimbursement line item.
Yeah, and I think we have some also in the Los Padres dam and reservoir study.
Correct. A small amount is coming from that as well. And so reimbursement line items typically don't get caught up until after we've closed the fiscal year, because as we close June, then we will look at all of our operating expenses and then bill CalM. And so we will accrue that. So as David mentioned, the next meeting, we will definitely have a full picture of how the fiscal year looked on all of those individual line items.
And some will reimburse over several years, is that correct?
I'm sorry?
Some
Yeah.
will reimbursed over several years, is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other
Hi,
questions?
John.
Susan?
Yeah, Susan.
Oh,
Susan
okay,
has-
go ahead, John. We'll come back to Susan.
Susan, is that okay? Thank you.
Yeah.
So one thing I had said before on the committee that I'd like to emphasize again is that we have here a combination of the water supply charge and the user fee. And I think that given the mandate of this committee that we shouldn't have that combination of revenues. I understand that they both flow towards certain expenses, but I think it's impingent upon this committee to set aside the user fee from our discussions and to focus simply on the water supply charge with the idea of lining it up with near-term expenses. And therefore, as those expenses go away, retiring the water supply charge in that shorter time frame. I would like for that to be a serious consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Susan?
Maybe that should go on the agenda for another meeting to discuss. I was just curious because on the water supply receipts, there was a 1.9% receipt collected over budget. And then the year before, there was a little bit less than 100%. How is that 1.9%? Does that go towards future, or does it cover what wasn't given last year? How does that work if you get a little more than the 100% you budgeted?
And Susan, you're talking about the water supply
Charge receipts.
Yes. So basically, we don't have any control on the collections. It's whatever the county collects, they reimburse us, or they send it to us, and we report on that collections. If a portion of the fee is not collected, it gets collected and sent to us the following year. So
Okay.
so
Just was
basically,
curious how that.
yeah, you basically, sometimes you do have little fluctuations because not everybody pays their property tax bill on time.
Okay, that shows right here, really. Okay, thank you.
And then I do have a question on that same line. Just the way it reads to me, percentage collected over budget was 101.9. And if I took it literally, it would mean that we were over 100% over budget. So I just might confuse some people. I don't know.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, Jason. So just 9%. As opposed to 100%.
And yeah, and just a little more, just to add clarity to that $3.3 million number. Basically, when we were budgeting for 2021, last fiscal year in I believe April or May, that's when COVID had just hit us, and so we were not sure, because normally we budget $3.4 million on water supply charge, but we were not sure how COVID was going to affect or have an impact on the collections. And so we purposely had budgeted $3.3 million, but as you can see, they did come up over than what we had budgeted. So COVID did not have a significant impact on the collections. So this year, you'll see the item number 3, budget, you'll see that we have bumped up the budget back to our $3.4 million.
Suresh, I think what he was referring to was actually the labeling of that number, because I think, I don't have it up in front of me right now, but I think it said percent over under budget. So obviously we weren't 101% over budget. We were 1 point something percent over budget, which is just a little tiny.
Yeah, just nomenclature.
Yeah.
Someone who wasn't used to reading the statement might, if they just jump to the bottom line, they might think, wonder what's going on.
I'll change that line to read correctly.
And it looks like Mayor Peak wants to say something.
Thank you, Suresh, for the budget review. So my understanding is that the remit for this committee is the water supply charge, which looks to be about 25% of the revenue, annual revenue of the district. And so I concur with Mr. Tilley's recommendation that we should have a report that focuses on that part of the revenue that is the remit of this committee. I mean, it's nice to know the whole picture for the water management district budget, but that's not what we're supposed to be looking at, if that's correct.
Yeah, what I presented actually is not the entire picture of the district. It's just the water supply fund. And the water supply charge is just a component revenue that helps fund for the water supply charge. I mean, there are other revenue sources that come into that fund itself. It'd be really hard to just show the water supply revenue and then what expenses are funding that, because it's kind of like expenses in that whole fund basically different aspects of expenses and revenues that actually help pay for that or help fund that water fund cost center. I guess that's how you'd want to look at it, is the cost center, which is the water supply fund. And so water supply charge is just one aspect of the revenue, kind of like funneling in to that fund.
Yeah, or in other
Well,
words,
Suresh, I get that. And then that's why I suggested that we identify certain expenses that which the water supply charge would be earmarked for, so that as those expenses went away, the water supply charge could go away. I think it really fails to recognize the mission of this committee and the purpose of the water supply charge if it's expense driven versus being revenue driven.
right. I think the corollary to that, though, is what this shows is that if we actually set the water supply charge at the level required to meet all water supply expenditures, we'd be setting it at 10 million, 10.1 million, but it's only 3.4 million. And so we're subsidizing water supply efforts with these other sources. And this is where,
That's one way of looking at it.
Yeah, and so it gets really muddied when we say, well, we want to allocate water supply charge to specific water supply related expenditures. And when they go away, then the water supply charge should go away. Because as you recall, what the board adopted in October a year ago was, all right, let's start prioritizing the use of the user fee to pay off the Mechanics Bank loan, get that out of the way, because that's secured by the water supply charge. That would free up, an obligation against the water supply charge. To repay ourselves for this interfund use of all these other sources. And so, part of what we do by subsidizing, as an example, again, the user fee here was, I'm going blind, 1.6 million or 1.9, almost 2 million. Or is that property taxes?
No, that's property tax. I think user fee was like 700,000 or something.
Yeah, 625. But both of those are good examples of, we took from other revenue sources to subsidize. So if the next step is to repay ourselves, and we're currently a little bit over 10 million in interfund borrowing, then, again, trying to tie the water supply charge to a specific expenditure within the budget year doesn't necessarily work, because any excess monies that come in, if we actually set the water supply charge at the right level, we'd be repaying ourselves for another 3 years to fully repay the interfund borrowing. But I get where you're coming from. I mean, it would be much more orderly, I think, to the charge of this committee to only look at where the water supply charge itself is going to. But to Suresh's point, it's difficult to do so. This is, as he said, this is a snapshot of the entire water supply fund, and our other activities include, water demand, which is our conservation and permitting activities, and then the environmental resource division. So you don't see any of that expenditure, off the page here. But I think this has been kind of an ongoing issue with the committee. Is, we're only seeing water supply, but we're seeing too many other things than just the water supply charge. And I get that. I don't know, Suresh, maybe we can do some brainstorming on how to make it even more simplified.
Can I ask,
Thank you.
just for clarity, is what percentage is that 3.3 million water supply charge of the district's total budget then?
Ooh, I have that number.
Total revenue, sorry, total revenue.
Yeah, total revenue. I think that's gotta be about 25 or 27%. I don't know exact number. I do have it.
Yeah, I think that's what Bill
Isn't
said.
It shows
isn't
in
the
my,
district at 24 million?
right.
And this is 3 million? So that's about 9%?
The fiscal, if I can jump jump in. The fiscal year 21-22 budget revenue is about 30 million, and the water supply charge is 3.4 million. So I think
Yeah.
someone said about 11%. It's just a small fraction.
Yep. And, you know, again, if we took reimbursable monies out of both the revenue and the expenditure side, it would reduce the expenditure side, and you would see that the water supply charge is a bigger proportion. You know, our three primary revenues are the water supply charge. Well, it goes in this order: user fee, water supply charge, and then property taxes. But some years reimbursements from others, both grants and reimbursement from CalAm, are significant. So
Yeah, so
that's
the
why
total percent of the water supply charge against the entire district budget is 12% on the revenue
and, you
side.
know, I sort of misspoke there again as well, because this is the first year that we've now included wholesale water purchase revenues and expenditures. So now we've got this $4.5 million revenue with a pretty close to $4.5 million offsetting expenditure. So it's increased the size of our budget quite a bit, but it's kind of a wash, a throughput. So I think that the you know, proportion to budget is getting distorted by some of these things that weren't there even a year ago.
Well, I'll circle back to Mr. Tully's initial request and question is, what part of the budget does this committee have oversight of? And it sounds like the accounting process and the budgeting process for the district doesn't allow the committee to easily see what part of the revenue and expenditure stream that we're supposed to be having oversight. And that's just quick observation.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the revenue summary that in the budget that was just passed.
Understood, Bill.
What I'm seeing here is almost more information than what we're being supposedly charged with. I mean, if it were possible to streamline this and really identify which funds were going specifically where, which I can see would be really hard to do, we would be getting less information, and in a sense, at least, you know, as much oversight as we have, less oversight. But I think, as just real quick, as expenditures go away, which ideally some of them may go away, and again, I'm speaking idealistically, the bottom line, we should be showing surpluses at the bottom of this chart here. And once we start seeing surpluses, I think we can start discussing reducing the water charge. That's kind of the way I see it.
Yep. No, I think you're right, Jason. If we stripped it down to its basics, what you would see kind of on an annual basis or a regular basis would be, what do we want to spend on in the water supply area? So you'd see all the project expenditures. Maybe you wouldn't see all of them. Maybe you just see the total. And then you would see just the total of the personnel and contract labor and supplies. And we say, this is all the stuff that we want to spend on in water supply. Here's what the water supply charge is getting us. So here's, you know, the negative. And you're right, over time, as we expend less on projects, it should flip and then become a positive, a surplus. And the only difference between showing a surplus and actually having a surplus would be, are there still things like the Mechanics Bank loan and the repayment of borrowed internal funds? But those could actually be shown as a line item as well. So let's Suresh and I will go back and we'll look at simplification. You know, we show you all of the the middle third of this revenues and expenditures page to show you that our indirect is staying under that, percentage requirement from the ordinance, the 152 ordinance. But again, maybe it's just too much information, which I think we can attack a little bit.
For me, it would be helpful to see a little bit more information specifically about the water supply charge, but I would not like to see any less information than what we're already seeing now.
I'm with you, but I think we can maybe add a new chart or a new table that's very, very simplified to the cause. Because I think you may recall at our last meeting, there were quite a few new members, so that agenda packet had, the mission and the charge, and but I also included, well, we had the annual report, so you could see what issues were current. But I also had a summary of all of the expenditures to date on water supply and all of the receipts to date from the water supply charge to demonstrate that, obviously we've been running at a deficit, mostly because we didn't borrow anything. We were just paying as we go, except for the Mechanics Bank loan. And so I think we could layer in that deficit as well. And so as we begin to get rid of that, get rid of the Mechanics Bank loan, those are almost like project expenditures. And those are things that maybe that's what we need to see is, where's this money supposed to go? How close are we to flipping it from a running negative to now a running positive? That means you've got a surplus, which is when you can immediately sunset. Even though we've also added into the board policy, if there's an excess of user fees, different revenue source, but if there's an excess over budget, that we would apply that excess to the same requirements. So, we'd be retiring that deficit on interfund borrowing, the Mechanics Bank loan, and so forth, which also brings you closer to the ability to sunset, which, is a goal of at least a third of our members, if not closer to half. And we get that, but I think demonstrating that in a more understandable fashion is something we'll work on. We'll try to get that together. Do we want to flip to the next item? Which is,
Want to share that?
yeah. You going to share it from your screen?
Joel's going to do it.
By the way, I like it. Suresh, you look like you're in the district, radio booth with the logo and the black background and the headset on, and Joel's down with the conference room logo.
My background is pretty messy. That's why I had to hide behind that little picture.
Are you able to see Exhibit 3A? Suresh?
Yeah, so this is the budget for again, it's not the entire budget for the district. This is the budget just for the water supply fund. This is what was adopted by our board on June 21st. And pretty much the same format as what I showed on the water supply charge analysis in terms of the revenues and expenses. The only difference here is basically I'm showing the budget from 2021 and the budget for 21-22. So, the one thing that I had mentioned, water supply charge in 2021, we had reduced it because of the unknown COVID impacts. Now we're back to 3.4. The capacity fee, no change. The PWM water sales, it's about double. And the reason for that is because 2021 only captured about 7 or 8 months of 7 months of sales, and 7 months of sales. And the 21-22 budget is all 12 months of water sales. And then project reimbursements pretty much in line over the last fiscal year. And then property tax, it goes up proportionally as the home sales numbers, not home sales, but the home values go up. Our portion of that goes up by a little bit as well every year. User fee did go down a little bit because the actual came in a little bit higher than what we are budgeting. And so it always kind of like, and you'll see there's an item on the user fee itself. You'll see why we are not able to kind of like pinpoint an exact number, because it's highly unstable in terms of what comes in every month. It goes based on water consumption and all that. So we've been trying to track it for the last 3-4 years. We've got some average number that we can track, but still not right down to the penny. Interest income, that's going down a little bit, and that's because interest rates in the market generally have gone down, and we are also spending money on projects as well. So that number's gone down a little bit. And then some others, capital equipment reserve, pretty much the same in line. Carryover projects, this is the carryover project from prior fiscal year. Is any project that was budgeted in 2021 and did not get completed. We, on the expense side, we moved the project into 21-22, but then also, since we say that this was already budgeted in the prior fiscal year, we take that number and help fund for it on the revenue side, because truly that project was already a fully budgeted project. It's just that the expenses did not materialize. So we have to show on the flip side, the revenue itself that shows what the carryover number is. And then the fund balance use is basically we saying that in order to complete 21-22 with all the revenues coming in, all the expenses coming in, we will still need about $1.3 million help from our fund balance just to be able to sustain the water supply fund with all the projects that we have listed. So Joel, a little further down, if you scroll the page. So on the expense side, it's very similar to what I showed on the other chart itself, but these are some of the numbers that we are budgeting. Mechanics Bank Reserve, we are budgeting again this fiscal year $500,000, and we will be going to our board in August and be letting the board know that we are paying some of those loan down, and that's going to help come from this reserve that we started accumulating from last year. We're also showing another $500,000 from the Pebble Beach reclamation. This is the other second half of the reimbursement that I had mentioned, was help paid for over 2 years. So this will complete that reimbursement or reclamation project reimbursement. No election expense this year, and then we have the indirect and direct. And then further down, you'll see the project expenses. This is all of the project expenditures that are slated to be done this fiscal year. We have some PWM expansion related costs. We are buying more of the operating reserve for the PWM. And there's the water purchase line item for the water, and then ASR phase 1 project, and then some reimbursement, and then local water projects and some other small ticket items. So all in all, the total project cost for 21-22 came out to $17.4 million. And again, this is what's in the budget. This is what was adopted by the board. We will start tracking this down as we start this fiscal year, and as we come before this committee, we will show the progress. And as David mentioned, we'll try and streamline the way we present those numbers to help better understand.
Yeah, I think, if you really stripped it down to the basic cause or the reason that this committee was formed, everybody wanted to just focus on water supply projects. So as you look at this chart, that would be the 17.4 million number, except you would take out the water sales, because that we're getting a separate revenue for that. We're getting, CalAM's paying for the water. So that would reduce it by 9 million. But everything else, and that of course ignores our people, our salaries and services and supplies and so forth. But at its basics, when we pass this ordinance to create the water supply charge, even though we had broad language in there that it could be used for almost any district purpose, the goal of both the Taxpayers Association and the Association of Realtors was, no, we want you guys to only focus on water supply. That's a need in the community. That's what this charge should be used for. But again, if you took the 17 minus the 9 in water purchase revenue, you're still trying to fund $8 million with $3.4 million of water supply charge. And that has been our dilemma, all these years going forward. So every time we hear from a community member who says, well, you need to start sunsetting that water supply charge, we're just simply not in a position to do so. And I want to talk a little bit about some of these project expenses that are in here. We currently have, so we buy all the output from Pure Water Monterey. Then we turn around, we sell anything above what is required for our reserve requirements directly to CalAm. And then eventually when Marina Coast Water District comes online to take its proportion, they'll be also expending money and paying revenues over to Monterey One Water. But we have paid for and carry as an asset on our books a little over 1,000 acre feet in the operating reserve. And the purpose of that reserve is to have water in case there's a plant outage, because CalAm would not agree to cover all of our fixed costs, which is called a take or pay contract, which means you take the output or you pay for the output anyway, whether you take it. And those kind of contracts are designed to make sure you cover all your debt service and fixed costs. They said they would not do that kind of contract for Pure Water Monterey, even though they had done that kind of contract for the failed regional desal project with Marina Coast Water District. So we had to come up with a mechanism to protect us for a revenue shortfall should the plant not be operating and producing water. So we agreed to establish this operating reserve, but the district paid for all of that out of pocket and has no offsetting revenue to make it up. It just sits there as an acquired asset until needed. Well, as part of the water purchase agreement for the base Pure Water Monterey project, we agreed to increase that to a half a year supply after 3 years of operations, which means we need to get it to 1,750 acre feet, half of 3,500, which is our current commitment to CalAm. So that will be additional expenditures by the district that's labeled here as operating reserve. And many of you may have heard, and we can discuss this under item 5 as well, but may have heard that we're in negotiation on a water purchase agreement for Pure Water Monterey expansion. With that will come a requirement to increase the operating reserve by another roughly 1,125 acre feet in the ground, which the district has to pay for through its revenues. So there's still this very direct water supply related set of expenditures that are looming out there for which we have no direct offsetting revenue other than the water supply charge. And when the water supply charge isn't enough to do two things, for example, pay for a $4 million fourth deep well at Pure Water Monterey and fund the operating reserve, that's when we start tapping our reserve balances or user fees and what have you. And so our current outlook for the next several years, because expansion's moving forward and we've got these obligations, is that we're going to continue just on 1 or 2 or 3 simple little expenditures for water supply, not even the entire fund as Suresh has been walking us through, that we're still going to be short and will remain short for several years to come. So I just want you to kind of, to simplify it in your own minds, you look down at the bottom and you say, well, those are the expenditures. If they're more than 3.4 million, we have a problem. And that means we're, taking money from elsewhere. So for those of you who want to see a sunset of the water supply charge, until we address that problem, kind of what Jason was referring to earlier, you show a surplus at the bottom, we know we can start sunsetting. That's what we're trying to get to, but these numbers don't let that happen. Now, eventually, we'll be done with Pure Water Monterey. We'll be done with ASR. ASR is very close to finished. And so we will be reducing many of these expenditures, but we have to probably get through another 2 to 3 years for completion of the expansion, which will, we will also get tapped for some pre-construction costs on that as well. So stay tuned. But that's kind of the simplification. Is just look at that bottom, and if it's bigger than the water supply charge, then that's why all these other things get reflected, because we rely on them. And the reason I keep moving around is I'm using my iPad and the batteries got down to 4%, and I plugged it in my computer and it wasn't charging. So now it's in my wall. So you can see in the background as equal opportunity, I have the no unmeasured J and the yes unmeasured J signs in the background. So just, if you only saw one of them earlier, they're both there.
I was wondering about that. I thought you were getting a little political there. So I'm glad you pointed out the other sign.
Suresh, you want to move on, or?
Yeah, so
Hey,
Joel.
Suresh, I had a question. It showed, you said property tax revenue was going up on the income side, but I thought the number was down. It was 1.75 instead of 1.85. Was that a typo, or are we actually planning for less property tax revenue next year?
No, we're actually having more. So you got to look at, keep in mind, the newer column is on the left, the older column is on the right. So Joel, you want to bring up the
I
next
think
chart?
Bill Peak wants to
Oh.
say something.
Yeah, but before we go to
Muted.
the mayor, Kevin is correct. It's a reduction of the property taxes going into the water supply fund, but overall, the district as a whole, we're seeing our property tax total collections going up. So it's just another nuance of trying to limit it to just this fund, and what you're seeing is only what's happening in this fund.
Yeah, that's what I thought might have been happening, because I saw that the property tax, gross prediction was down, as well as user fees. And I doubted that in terms of total revenue from those sources, we were actually going down. It's an allocation reduction, basically.
The allocation is going down for water supply fund, but the total revenue is going up. Yes.
Yeah. There's been so much turnover in property in Monterey County that and actually this is kind of long-term. Over the last, I think, 20 years, we've grown at 5.08% per year in total assessed valuation. And you're limited to a 2% increase under Prop 13, except for reassessments due to title transfer.
Right.
And so we've been seeing property taxes go up pretty strong. And what's interesting, not to jump too far afield, but one of the issues we have with our LAFCO application over the Measure J stuff is, well, what are going to be the property tax impacts on other taxing agencies if the ownership of the assets moves to a tax exempt public agency? And what we've found is that all of the potential losers, other taxing jurisdictions that might lose taxes, very likely will outgrow their loss in one single year based on the county's growth rate. But no one likes to think about it that way. We won't get any credit. Those are things that are happening elsewhere. If we take away, a chunk of property taxes, the burden's all on us as the district for doing so, even though the taxing agencies grow out of it in very short times. And was there another question? Moving on. Yeah.
Bill, we were not able to hear your question. You were muted out.
Yeah, thank you, Suresh, for the water supply fund budget. Two questions. So one is, are these capital projects, do you have enterprise fund accounting for each of the projects?
No, we don't have enterprise fund for any of these. We operate under governmental fund for the district itself. However, because we have we are tied into the Pebble Beach reclamation project due to the financing structure, we report the Pebble Beach reclamation project as an enterprise fund, which is a component unit on our financial statements. But that you don't get to see it unless you take our actual audited financial statements. You'll see that in there.
And when Rabobank issued their loan to us, they did set up a structure that's very much like an enterprise fund, but it's not recognized under our accounting. If we were to acquire Cal-Am, we would actually go to a formal enterprise fund for the operation of the utility. and do financing against that and so forth. So it's a great question because typical utilities will have an enterprise fund so that they can make certain debt covenants and so forth. So anyway, it's a great question, but everything
well,
comes in.
it's more than a question. I find enterprise funds for operating capital projects to be very instructive for folks to understand what are all the costs, and the way your accounting has the pure, like for instance, the Pure Water Monterey and the ASR projects embedded in the general fund accounting. It's well, it's near impossible for me to understand what the accounting is for those projects. So another question, and maybe it was more appropriate for the last item, was would love to know what the board of directors thinks this committee's oversight role is. Is it the water supply fund, or is it the water supply project, or the water supply charge? I think that would be very helpful, as we're the advisory board or advisory committee to the board. Would love to know what they think. Anyhow, I guess that's more of a comment rather than a question, but.
Yeah, but Mayor, it's a good one, and it's very depending on the board makeup over time. But you know, typically it's kind of been viewed well. When this committee was originally established, the board said it was a necessary cost of getting the water supply charge passed, and that the two major pieces of oversight were making sure that we didn't overspend on indirect costs, and that there was a reasonable effort made to eventually sunset all or a portion of the charge, knowing full well that we established the charge to do water supply projects, and there probably wasn't going to be any surplus for some time. And so they knew that you were going to be charged with an oversight role that probably was, you know, timed out somewhere in the future, yet we continue to meet waiting for that future date to arrive. And then the complexion changed a little bit. You know, we've got people on this committee right now who are like, well, continue to collect all the revenue you can and don't sunset anything until we resolve Measure J. And, you know, that rubs some members and past members of this committee wrong. And there's, as I said, past members and current members who say, no, have at it. You guys are going to need all the revenue you can get. So.
You didn't mention global warming, but that is something that will impact the future for all of us too.
Absolutely, Marlene. You know, we've actually got some study going right now on both the Salinas Basin and the Carmel River Basin with a 100-year climate warming scenario that the Bureau of Reclamation is working on. I haven't seen any of their tech memos yet, but I suspect it's going to change the kind of investment we have to make, clearly. So it will be the next guy sitting in my chair, though. It'll be his problem or her problem. So okay,
right.
so
Moving on to the next item. Joel, you want to bring that chart up on screen? So this is item number 4, and basically what we do is we just share the this pretty graph here, which just shows what the collection has been on the user fee for the district as whole. Keep in mind, not all of this user fee goes into the water supply fund. Only 1.2% of the collection goes. But we just show, the reason for this chart is just to show how unstable this revenue is. Even, you know, I mean, you could say it's peak and off peak, but then even within those peak and off peak months, you'll see those charts just kind of like go all over the place for those months. And so that's why we are not able to pinpoint a number itself. in terms of how much revenue we're going to collect. If you can see, my 2017-18 number was a little over $5 million on the total collections. And then 18-19 was $4.7 million. Then again, 19-20 bumped to 5.4. 2021 so far has been 4.8, but we are estimating it's going to be over $5 million because I don't have the collections for April and June yet. And so that's the whole point to show this chart, is that it's just highly unstable.
What happened to April?
They lost the check, or they never mailed the check.
And are they aware of that?
They're aware of it. They're looking into it. I believe last I talked with my staff, they were going to confirm how they sent it to us. If they can track it, great. If not, they will reissue a check.
And I don't know if everybody's been paying attention, but Scott did join us in the meeting.
Yeah, he's been with us for a while.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's all I have on this item.
Okay. And that takes us to water supply gossip. And without getting too far afield, let's start with Pure Water Monterey. The company, CalAm, has agreed to negotiate a water purchase agreement. We're in the process of doing so. They did not come to the district to do so until after our complaint with the PUC was filed. So for any of you who were on the call this morning, I think there was some confusion created by a description that Lori Dolquist said that they've been talking for a while and they met even on May 4th. We did not meet until May 11th. That was the first time the district was involved. And of course, we filed our complaint May 1st. But that is moving along. And I believe that the company is doing so in earnest. There are a variety of small related projects that they've already gotten started on for extraction wells and piping. So we do foresee that moving forward. We are making sure that our requests for federal aid include 2 injection wells for the expansion. Those of you who follow this stuff may have heard that there was only going to be 1 additional well for injection, and we're speccing it out for 2, which will bring the total number of injection wells up to 6, creating redundancy and capacity and helping with spreading out the whole injection. So soup to nuts, once we believe we have an agreement in principle for the water purchase agreement, if it's done as a settlement of our complaint, that could be relatively quickly. If it's done as an application to the PUC, it may not be accepted by the PUC for 6 months, could be more. So we'll have to wait and see. But once we're certain that we have agreement, then we, the district, will spend more money on the pre-construction costs of that project. Basically, we've got to go from 30% design to 100% design and bid documents so that you can actually do the project. So that's moving along. On the base project, we have 2 deep injection wells that are being added to bring the total up to 4. And those are scheduled for completion, both of them in December. The first one's about 3 weeks late and the second one's about 2 months early. So I think all in all, we call that a win. The funding sources for the expansion project will probably be a combination of state revolving fund monies. We're in the queue for a federal, what's called WIFIA, which is a Water Infrastructure Financing something act, which is a federal loan. And then any of the shortfall, we'll either do a public borrowing or internal borrowing. But we're optimistic that that's moving along. The desal plant, despite most people's understanding that it's dead, is not. It's being reworked. California American has said to us that they hope to be in a position to file a complete application to the Coastal Commission as soon as November. And most of the places that we interact with them, the storyline is they haven't given up on desal, that they still have perhaps a revised project or some project in mind. We don't think that the demand numbers warrant it, but nevertheless, that's kind of where we're at. And my battery's still going dead. It's supposed to be charging. And then aquifer storage and recovery is pretty close to complete. We've got some landscaping work that we're doing, but the project is pretty much set up to go. To maximize its use, there's a parallel pipeline that's being designed for about a 1.3 mile segment, which will be part of CalAm's portfolio of assets, so no charge to the district of the water supply charge. And then it's, you know, the smaller little projects, but most of what we're doing is all in that General Jim Moore Boulevard area. We're the project manager for the injection wells for Pure Water Monterey and our aquifer storage and recovery. We're a little nervous because of this dry year we just had. We only injected 66 acre feet, and the long-term average based on climate data is about 1,300 acre feet from either direct from the river or from storage every year. Currently, we don't see having to change that long-term assumption, but when you've got short-term climate effects, Marley, here's your, you know, global warming, right? You know, if we get another couple of these in a row, we would deplete all of our storage, and that would mean aquifer storage and recovery would not be acting like a reservoir, which it was designed to do, because we don't have enough long-term buildup of the supply behind the dam, so to speak. The only thing that kind of offsets that in our minds is when Pure Water Monterey expansion comes online, it will have a lot of excess capacity, and it's less affected by drought. So we'll have the ability to offset any ASR inability to produce with this excess capacity in the expansion. But, you know, the expansion won't come online for 24 to 30 months. So we've got another, you know, year or two that we have to look at very carefully as to what's happening with temperature and precipitation. So any questions just in general on what's going on in water supply?
Yes, back to the desal plant. Didn't CalAm run into some trouble with the county in a legal case there as well? I yeah, they did. So the county issued their use permit, their grading permit, their use permit, kind of a combined permit. Then there was a stay that was placed on that due to the failure of the Coastal Commission to act in October of 2019, or the stay got put in place before the Coastal Commission. Basically, the plaintiff saying, hey, until the Coastal Commission acts, these are moot permits and you shouldn't allow them to move forward. And then the Coastal Commission didn't act, and then they deferred, and then COVID hit, and then they deferred further all the way to, September, November of last year. And in the meantime, I think it was Judge Villarreal, despite announcing her retirement, put in a decision that said there was not adequate environmental review on those county permits. So additional county review had to be, additional secret review had to be done. So the stay on those permits became irrelevant because now they had to go back and do more work. So yeah, Jason, that is correct. Thank you for that information. It's always helpful to hear it, hear it in different words so I can understand exactly the moving parts and where they stand. So thank you. Anybody else with just general questions on water supply? Or
David, this is Mike Rachel.
Yep.
So I'm one of the newer members of the panel. This is my second exposure or involvement today. A couple of questions going back to the mayor's comment about the board and the board's direction or specificity about our role, our responsibility. And you'd mentioned the two, about reducing direct expenses, and the other would be either eventually reducing or sunsetting the water supply charges. I agree with that. My question is, was that part of the original charter, or is that just fine tuning exactly what is expected of us?
Yeah, it's part of the original ordinance. And so, and creation of the citizens panel was a byproduct of that ordinance adoption. So written into the ordinance is, kind of an if and when there are sufficient revenues from another fee or charge established by the district on, on a CalAm bill, then the water supply charge should be sunset. And also in the ordinance was the 12% cap on indirect costs. And so that's why, a citizens panel was created. And I think, unfortunately, because, as I said earlier, we put ourselves immediately into spending all the money we could collect on development of these water supply alternatives, that we got, pretty deep into it pretty quickly, that despite the drumbeat of, folks like Paul Bruno when he was on this committee and so forth, saying, hey, we need to start looking at sunsetting, our opinion has been, we haven't been close yet, and we won't be close at least for another few years. So it's kind of like having a charge you can't act on.
Okay, another question. Earlier in the meeting, really almost at the start, the water supply charge was referred to, I believe I heard it as Fund 35.
That's the water supply fund. So we have three funds, environmental division, which is mitigation on the river and all that activity, the water demand and permitting area, and then water supply. And so we call water supply Fund 35. But the supply charge itself is just a subset of revenues that go into that fund.
So is there tracking available for any part of expenditures back to Fund 35 that would be helpful to this panel?
The answer is yes. And so what Suresh and I've done now at least twice is we went back to the starting point of this water supply charge, and we looked at all the expenditures in the water supply fund and said, okay, here's what we spent on water supply. Here's what we've collected in the water supply charge. Here's what we've gotten from reimbursements, grants and what have you. And the difference, which is still running at a deficit, and I mentioned was about 10 million when we did this exercise 3 months ago. But the difference is the shortfall of the water supply charge during that same period. And so we can track that. And if that's something you'd have an interest in, I think we could probably come up with an interesting maybe chart that shows annually, where those expenditures have gone. Suresh, isn't that what we've been doing to do those two, the letters? We've just been taking everything from Fund 35?
Yeah, what we've been doing is basically we have all the expenses and all that in Fund 35. We basically just strip away the property tax and the other things that we funded, channeled into it to subsidize the fund. And so that'll just give you that recap that you provided, I believe, at the last meeting as well, which is what the delta is.
I'll write that one down, though. It might be interesting to see it in a different form than what we've done, and maybe have it available all the time.
As I understand it, then the water supply charge, which is what this committee is supposed to consider, is only a part of what's needed to assure an adequate water supply. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And yeah. And that's what, our earlier conversation about the confusion of seeing the entire water supply fund is greater than just the water supply charge. And
David, one last item for me, and that is, I'm assuming pre-pandemic that this panel met in person. Will that be happening? I personally enjoy the benefit of the human interaction in meetings like this. So if that's possible, I would certainly look forward to it.
Absolutely. You know, I think we're all on pins and needles to find out what happens with the Delta variant, because, you know, when you look at where we are, we're kind of on the leading edge of the same problem that got us in shelter in place. It's fewer numbers, but, you know, we still, you know, Monterey County is about 30% unvaccinated of the folks of age, but, you know, the country as a whole is still about 40% unvaccinated. And when you look at the impact, you know, we could, you know, we just reopened on Tuesday for our permit desk downstairs, but I could foresee us shutting down again. There are some organizations, I think Pebble Beach Community Services District went back to live meetings with public participation via Zoom, which is a challenge for us, because if we socially distance in our small conference room, there's really not going to be any public space available. So as long as we can still do Zoom meetings, we're probably going to do Zoom meetings, but we're all getting closer to reopening. I know City of Sand City's reopened their city council meetings. I don't know, Jason, what's the City of Seaside done?
We did a hybrid where 4 of the 5 council members did show up in person, and some people in the public did show up, and it actually technically worked pretty well. I was one of the council members who did show up. Everybody wore masks the entire time,
Yeah.
and which was our decision. And then it worked really well. But I don't want to be in the position as a civic leader to feel that people have to come in. You know, if it makes them uncomfortable to show up to a public meeting, whether it be a member of the body or a member of the public, I want to leave that option for people to be virtual if possible, at least for
Mike, has COD gone back to in person?
We did. 2 weeks ago, our meeting was in person, but we restricted it just to the board and staff, and any outside involvement was via Zoom. We also have redone our offices with for ventilation, more air changes,
Yeah.
and have sequestered our lobby. It's airtight. So.
And Mike, if you're not aware, there's a letter circulating right now that your annexation up in the valley, there's certain bodies that we interact with on the river that would like to see all of the new connections be returned as recycled water to benefit the river. So I'll just have you know that movement's afoot. So for those of you who don't know, Mike Rachel's on the board of the Carmel Area Wastewater District. And we've got a number of crossovers as our district. We both participate in what's called the Reclamation Project, which was the one enterprise fund that Suresh alluded to earlier. We financed it. COD owns and operates it. The pipes inside the Del Monte Forest and the delivery of the water is by Pebble Beach Community Services District, and the district owns the water in their pipes, and so we sell it to the golf courses and Stevenson School. So it's a great example of collaboration, but so we cross over there, and then a lot of the people that interact with COD who have a special interest in the river health, we also interact with. So it's interesting, you know, and Kevin, who's on here, used to be our senior fisheries biologist, but also is married to a city council member in yet another city. And I don't think they've gone back into in-person meetings yet, have they, Kevin?
No, and I was going to mention the State Fish and Game Commission, you know, still is not gone back to in-person yet. But they said they really they were thinking about trying to go to a blended in the future when they went back live, because they felt they got a whole different cadre of participants that they would lose if we went to live only. So that's another consideration, whether it's technically feasible or not, you know.
Yeah, we've had really good public participation because of the ease of doing it from your home and just not having to drive out here. And it's a good thing. I suspect that we'll see more legislation trying to keep it alive rather than just an emergency order. But yes, Mike, we plan to meet in person in the future.
Very
So,
good. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else with anything underwater gossip?
Do you have anything to say about the LAFCO situation?
Yeah, we're down to one item that I was working on right before this call that we'll probably submit tomorrow. And then we will ask for them to deem our application complete. They have to schedule a hearing for us within 90 days of deeming the application complete. They've gone out and hired a consultant to review all of the materials that have been submitted to date, CalAM's and our own. And I've been cautioned that that consultant may request some additional information from the district, which I hope is not the case. I've let LAFCO know that we might decline, but we will see. But they need a couple of months to do all that work. And so I think they're going to try to keep our hearing no sooner than October and probably try to squeeze it off into November. I'm not sure that they can hold on to it that long. So, you know, I'm hopeful. I mean, if they deemed it complete tomorrow when received, then they'd be forced to have our hearing in September. So I think they'll probably delay a little bit to the end of July so they can move that 90-day window to an October hearing. So that's what I think we're looking at there.
So I just heard you say that they have hired a consultant.
Yes. And it's a sole practitioner who's done a lot of consulting work, primarily with economic consequences for LAFCOs around the state.
Do you know what the district will have to pay for that?
Yeah, we asked them to try to keep it under 50,000. I think what they've done is their bid came in at 50 to 75, depending on what the add-ons are. So, you know, we'll but it's not going to be a full-blown recreation of the type of work that we've already done that, you know, between 3 different sets of consultants that work together as a team cost us over $1 million. And, you know, a single person cannot perform that kind of work in a 2-month period. So they don't want to call it a peer review, I understand. So it's going to be, you know, a consultant's opinion of all of the information that's out there.
They didn't use value engineering and all those buzzwords either, huh?
They'll use buzzwords. I just don't know which ones. So, but that is happening. You know, I would say the LAFCO process, because they've been so cautious, and then you saw the outcome that we got, has probably cost the district in this process 5 months, 4 to 5 months, and the insinuation of CalAM's attorneys on the CEQA process cost us probably another 2 months. So it's, you know, the tactics to, you know, our board has not made its decision to move forward or not move forward, and that's a discretionary action that they will take in the future. But getting to that action, you know, is being delayed, and it costs us time and it costs us money. And, you know, if you can outweight your opponent and maybe change that board in 2022, things could change, you know. So the window that this board has that is generally supportive of public ownership is now. You know, next calendar year is an election, so things could change. So I think that, you know, we've got to have LAFCO action so the board can be positioned to make a decision. But we don't see it any sooner than October, November. And we've been told that even after they take action, it can take another 2 months because there's things that have to happen with the Board of Equalization at the state and some other things that, you know, but we'd at least have our green light for activating our powers to do potable water sales. But as I said, you know, the board just needs to be in the position to take action then they can decide what action they want to take. And the unfortunate part is we've lost a lot of time due to these kinds of interventions.
One last question. Will you be clarifying with the press the lie that CalAm told today at the pre-conference hearing about the dates? You said May 1st, you had filed and the negotiation began until May 11th, but I expect to see in the press what CalAm said, which is a lie, which is always a problem.
Yeah, I talked to everybody. I probably will talk to Dennis Taylor. I don't think it's a material lie. We struggled a little bit in describing our role in the three-party agreement. I think in the end we were successful, but yeah, a lot of what went on this morning, I don't think Lori Dolquist was really on top of everything. For those of you who watched it or listened to it, but the facts are very basic. We feel that they were given direction to go get a permanent water supply and they failed to act on it. And it's been a long time. And so our complaint was pretty straightforward. You have no options that are doable at this point, except Pure Water Monterey expansion. We all know that that's a path of least resistance, but since you failed to act, you need to be ordered to act. And, I think your one takeaway could be that the administrative law judges, and they had an associate.
Dave, I do think you're starting to get a little far afield.
Okay. It's water supply, but my impression was they didn't seem really excited about processing this complaint. Anybody else before we sign off? Marley, you have a question? Yeah.
Just going back to the meeting in person situation, I hope you'll remember that some of us are around young children a lot who cannot yet be vaccinated, and we're trying to be very cautious about that. So I hope there will always be an option as long as the virus is circulating in our county to have some of us participate remotely.
Could I mention that too? The Delta virus is extremely contagious. There is breakthrough with the vaccine in some instances, especially older people. And there are people that cannot or are in positions where their immune systems are weakened. At this point, I have a sister-in-law with cancer. I'm on her care team, and I sure wouldn't want to take anything to her. So if you can have some sort of hybrid situation, I would appreciate it. Thanks.
So we'll definitely take that into consideration. And Dave Stolzberry has died, so he has left the room.
If I can just make one more comment on that, and that's the hybrid, I think is a great idea, but right now part of the emergency order is relieves the noticing requirements. We talked about noticing earlier, but so when a board member takes part remotely or telephonically, in the past they had to put notice out on their window and have that publicly available. So I'm hoping that if you talk to any state legislators or anything like that, that when we do ultimately settle on a hybrid possibility, it works for the board members as well as the public.
Yeah, under the Brown Act, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll definitely take that into consideration as well. All right, should we adjourn?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Suresh. And
All right.
Yep. Good job.
Right.
Dave Laredo, you need a big stop sign for Dave. Flashing red, a flashing red.
Yeah, he goes through that stop sign regularly.
I noticed. That's why you need something visual. They're like beep, beep, beep.
Yeah, got it.
Just an idea. I'm not telling you what to do.
Thanks. I appreciate it, Scott. Okay.
I'm amazed you weren't texting him on the side,
Yeah.
Oh, he probably was.
Fair enough.
Thanks, y'all.
Take care.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.